Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the Kherson direction. According to information we have, the Russians continue concentration of their forces in this area. Pro-Ukrainian sources reported that during the previous days, the Russians managed to concentrate up to 300 boats along the river of Dnipro and along Dnipro estuary. The Ukrainians are saying that the Russians are about to begin their offensive operation or landing operation with the purpose to establish a very powerful stronghold on the Ukrainian side of both the river of Dnipro and Dnipro estuary. Of course, very interesting speculation, but maybe this is not a speculation. To understand what is happening right now in this area, it's good to to adjust the map, and it's good to understand what kind of events and what kind of different updates we have received probably since the end of April. So according to different geolocations, according to different probably events, according to different articles and statements that were made by different sources, the escalation of the situation in the Kherson direction started somewhere on the 28th of April. During that day, several pro-Russian resources reported that as a result of offensive operation, the armed forces of the Russian Federation first of all managed to establish complete control over these islands in front of the settlement by the name of Tyaginka. Several more pro-Russian resources reported that the units of the Dnipro group of forces quietly occupied the islands between Krynki and Kazachyi Lageri. Furthermore, there is unconfirmed information that Russian units were able to cross the right bank of the Dnipro and to answer the southern part of the settlement by the name of Tyaginka. So this author and this article also provides us some map with some adjustments. So if we return back to map, and according to this author and according to this article, the Russians during the probably by the end of the 28th of April of 2025 managed to establish complete control over this territory. Obviously, this is very huge progress on the ground, not just on the Russian side of the river of Dnipro, but also on the Ukrainian side of the river of Dnipro. But as for the 6th of May of 2025, we still haven't received anything that can confirm this, but it doesn't mean that that information that was provided on the 28th of April was fake. Another important thing, several days later, more precisely on the 2nd of May of 2025, we got lots of articles and lots of reports to the west of the city of Kherson. Several pro-Russian resources reported and several pro-Ukrainian sources confirmed that Russian sabotage and reconnaissance group have entered the islands in the Kizomys area. So the Russians and Ukrainians reported that during those days, the Russians managed to establish complete control over this territory in front of the settlement by the name of Kizomys. Once again, the Russians and Ukrainians reported that by the end of the 2nd of May, the Russians established complete control over this territory with the purpose to prepare this foothold before further offensive operation and further attacks in the direction of the settlements by the name of Kizomys and the settlements of Valentinskaya. Furthermore, at the same day, we got another report, another article that was published by a neutral mapper, neutral analyzer. According to him, the Russians concentrated huge army, lots of forces exactly on the Kinburn speed. For now, it's very difficult to understand what kind of number, what kind of forces the Russians concentrated in this area, but obviously due to updates to the southwest and northeast of Kherson, that was very important to understand what is happening there right now. Furthermore, and by the morning of the 6th of May of 2025, we got additional report, but this time we got report from the settlement of Pokrovsk. Once again, several pro-Russian resources reported that as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to establish complete control over this settlement that is located on the Russian side of the river of Dnipro. And several pro-Russian resources also added that the Russians managed to cross the river of Dnipro and to establish complete control over the settlement of Pokrovsk. So this is the situation according to several mappers by the beginning of the 6th of May of 2025. Now we can summarize everything, and we see that the Russians are working at least in 4 directions. In the area of the settlement of Tyaginka with the purpose to cut the R47 road and to probably disconnect the settlement of Kazatsk and Berislav from Kherson. The Russians improved their positions, maybe not in the vicinity of Pokrovsk, with the purpose purpose to create another points of pressure to the east of the city of Kherson. And according to information we have, the Russians are about to begin offensive operation in the direction of Kizomis and the settlement of Beregovo and many other different towns and villages in this side of Ukrainian part of Kherson. Furthermore, we have reports that the Russians concentrated a critical mass on the Kinburg speed, maybe with the purpose to cross the Dnieper estuary and to establish complete control over the towns and villages on the Ukrainian side. As for now, the Russians haven't started anything, but all these updates that we are receiving right now in these days tell us that Ukrainians, first of all, have lots of problems based mainly in the manpower on their side of the river. During the previous days and during the previous months, the Ukrainians were forced to redeploy lots of units and lots of forces from the Kherson direction in the direction of the city of Pokrovsk in the Sumy direction with the purpose to stabilize the situation. As for the Sumy direction, with the purpose to carry out another offensive operation. So basically, and as I understand, currently the Ukrainians have huge problems in this area. The Ukrainians believe that the river of Dnieper and all these water barriers will stop the Russians. But now we see that most likely nothing will stop the Russians. And if the Russians decide that the Ukrainians are not ready to, let's say, repel or to defend this territory, the Russians most likely will begin offensive operation in this area as well. So let's wait and see what is going to be next. But obviously the situation here is very difficult, first of all, for the armed force of Ukraine. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Sumy direction. I'll remind you that yesterday the Ukrainians made lots of attempts, first of all, to clear the territory along the border. They were removing mines and they were removing dragon teeth with the purpose to prepare attack roads for Ukrainian forces, and most likely the Ukrainians were planning to begin offensive operation today. But as for the 6th of May, the Ukrainians haven't started anything. And the main problem and the main reason of this is that the Ukrainians haven't managed to clear the roads and to clear possible roads of attacks. The Russians controlled the situation. The Russians had lots of drones, and when the Russians discovered and saw Ukrainian vehicles, engineering equipment, the Russians destroyed everything. So basically the Ukrainians made one attempt to prepare roads for attack, but they failed. And as for the 6th of May, the Ukrainians haven't started anything, which means that most likely the Ukrainians either are changing their plans or they're trying to improve their tactics and the current plan with the purpose to begin this offensive operation. The Russians, as you can see, hold their lines, and the Russians are not planning to fall back. At the same time, the Ukrainian resources reported that the Ukrainians were forced to evacuate two important and big settlements, the settlement of Vorozhba and the settlement of Belopolye. So these two villages or towns would be evacuated by the Ukrainians in the very near future, either because the Ukrainians are expecting Russian offensive operation with the purpose to create a secure zone, or the Ukrainians are planning to bring here additional forces with the purpose to create a critical mass and to support their offensive operation further deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation. At the same time, the Russians did the same. The Russians evacuated the settlement of Zvana and several villages and towns in this area as well, probably with the same purposes. But most likely the Russians are trying to reduce losses among civilians, because the Russians are saying that during the previous 24 hours, lots of, let's say, cases where discovered that Ukrainians were attacking not just military forces, but sometimes they were attacking civilian vehicles. That's in the end led to losses from the Russian side. So that is why the Russians decided to evacuate civilians. But from the other side, this is very important to do due to security, reasons, because sometimes civilians can provide this or that information, to the opposite side. So that is why both the Russians and the Ukrainians decided to evacuate towns and villages around the area of possible clashes. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction. We have lots of very important updates in this area. The Russians continue advancing in the direction of the settlement by the name of Novopavlovka. During the previous 24 hours, lots of mappers adjusted their maps in Russian favor. So let's compare the map between the dates. This is the situation by the end of the 5th of May of 2025, and I'll remind you that according to pro Ukrainian sources, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly and to establish almost complete control over the settlement by the name of Kotlerovka. As for the beginning of the 6th of May, several neutral mappers improved this update and shown that the village of Kotlerovka is under almost complete Russian control. The Ukrainians control or have control just over 30% of the settlement, but most likely during the upcoming 24 hours the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back further in the western direction. So as we can see, the Russians are getting closer and closer to the border between regions. As for the Kliban-Bykska direction or Konstantinovka or the eastern flank of the city of Pokrovsk, we have lots of very important updates and we have very important adjustments on map. Today the Russians, during the previous 48 hours more precisely or a little bit more, the Russians began offensive operation on at least 4 or 3 directions. First of all, the Russians continue advancing between reserves. Ukrainians tried to counterattack with the purpose to restore control over the stronghold they lost during the Russian offensive operation. In this video we can see Ukraine attempt to restore control over this company's stronghold, but when the Ukrainians answered these trenches, they were completely destroyed by Russian FPV drone attacks. So based on this video we have adjusted the map and we have colored this area with stronghold in the Russian favor. Furthermore, today we got proofs from the village of Malinovka. In this video we can see how the Russians, using lots of vehicles, tanks, infantry, fighting carriers, were moving in the direction of the settlement of Malinovka. In this video we can see how Ukrainians were trying to slow down and to stop the Russians with FPV drone attacks and with artillery strikes. But all those, let's say, attempts from the Ukraine side failed. The Russians managed to break the Ukrainian defense and to answer the settlement of Malinovka from the east. In this video we can see how the Russians were moving through the fields under very heavy fire from Ukrainian side. So several geolocations of that video were discovered exactly in these 2 points. The Russians currently have strong control over the eastern part of the settlement of Malinovka. The Ukrainian sources published several videos from the southern part of Mirolubovka. In this video we can see several FPV drone attacks on Russian vehicles, tanks and several soldiers that were moving in this part of the settlement of Mirolubovka. Based on this video we have adjusted the map. Furthermore, during the previous 24 hours, according to several geolocations, we came to the conclusion that the Russians also were trying to attack from the settlement of Grodovka in the western direction with the purpose to establish complete control over these 2 strongholds. As for now, we don't know for sure whether the Russians managed to do this or not. We have several videos that were published by the Ukrainians, by the 38th Marine Brigade of the Armored Forces of Ukraine. In this video we can see at least 1 tank with demanding equipment and 2 infantry fighting carriers. The Ukrainians attacked the Russian vehicles and convoys several times. A tank was destroyed the first and several vehicles were damaged as well. One of the geolocations was discovered exactly in this point. So very likely that the Russians managed to land infantry and that the Russian infantry answered this company's stronghold. Maybe there are very heavy clashes exactly for this area, but as for now we don't have even a single proof that can confirm this. The situation, as you can see, is very difficult. Furthermore, today we got another very important video that was published by the Russians. In this video, according to information we have, the Russians managed to discover Ukrainian HIMARS system that was attacking positions of the armored force of the Russian Federation. And in this video we can see how the Russians, as a result of FPV drone attack, managed to destroy this HIMARS system. And this is the 3rd HIMARS system during the previous 2 days. I'll remind you that yesterday 2 more HIMARS systems were destroyed on the Ukrainian side of the river of Dnipro. In this video we can see 2 HIMARS systems that attack Russian positions, and later these 2 systems were destroyed in hangar as a result of Russian artillery strike. The Russians managed to discover positions of the armored forces of Ukraine. So we see that the situation is very difficult for the Ukrainians. Despite a significant attempt from the Ukrainian side to stabilize the situation, we see that the Russians continue advancing and that the situation is getting worse and worse. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.